We're ready to go. Paula's recording.
Okay, that's recording now for you.
Thanks, Paula.
Okay.
Okay. 5.1, we're at 5.1, gents. 31st of March 2020 budget review. David, can I pass it over to you to give some summary on that?
Certainly can. Okay, so this was the third quarter budget review that has already been adopted by Council for the period ending March. I mean, I could certainly go into the fine detail, but there was generally a lot of ups and downs in operating, all for particular reasons that are noted in the report. The most significant one was the extra roads to recovery funding that we declared in this quarter. And there was a few changes to capital as well, where projects needed adjusting, one through carry forward, some through the work just exceeding the original budgets in the case of the resheeting, and so that's pretty much been offset by the extra roads recovery funding. Now in future, the intent is probably that these reviews should be looked at by the audit committee prior to council, but in this case here, it had gone to council first, but that's something we're certainly going to try and change in the future where the timing permits, so that the audit committee can review first.
Yep.
I think seeing that's been adopted by council, I can move the recommendation.
Yeah. Well, that's right. If it's already gone to council and been approved, I think we just say it's been received and noted.
Yeah, there was a fair discussion at council with the significant over expenditure in the resheet program, but yeah, that might be of interest to the independents that hadn't seen it previously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the only question I had besides about the resheeting one, which is dealt with later, was how many of the positive results were shifting work into the future rather than positive results. So in other words, has the bottom line been adjusted by not doing things is the question.
So on the operating side of things, it's really just a shift of where things, you know, were underspent because of, I don't know, maybe it was weather conditions, or there was one about loan interest where we hadn't borrowing that was originally in the budget, we didn't actually require in the end, so that was certainly a good result. So the operating side of things is just genuine, valid ups and downs, but of course they're not things that can be really pushed into the future. So it's just about what had been going on in that period of over the year up until the end of March. It's probably more in the capital where that can feasibly happen.
Yeah, just looking at that now.
So I mean, there's one there for Jamestown Stormwater as an example of that's a project that will, you know, it's just delayed because it wasn't ready to happen, and we rebudgeted in the future. But because it had such a fair portion of internal works, you can't actually, you know, you can only reallocate those. So, for example, they've been shifted to resheeting, and it'll get rebudgeted again in the future. So there's a couple of small community projects there which are just ins and outs, and the main one therefore is the resheeting. So which was a combination, cash wise is a combination of that shift in internal works and the extra roads recovery funds received. At a high level it is, and obviously that goes into further detail later in Peter's report.
Okay. That answers my question.
Any further comments to make? I don't think there should be, because it's been to council anyway. Jim, have you got any comments you want to make?
No, that was just a question.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was it. Yeah.
I think actually, do you have the recommendation already written? Yes, we have. That the Audit Committee note the contents of the budget review for the period ended 31 March 2020 as adopted at the May Ordinary Council meeting. If someone would like to move that, we'll be in business. Thanks, Dennis, and thanks, Jim. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Beautiful. Carried. Okay. Ian Max, external audit interim letter. I've had a read about it, read of it. Now, it all seems to come up pretty well. I don't think he's got any simple or any issues that he needs to discuss by the sound of it. Is there anything that anyone would like to comment about Ian McDonald's letter?
Well, I might just mention that because the audit was done remotely, there was a little bit of on-site work that they can only do on-site. For example, reviewing creditors folders and some payroll files, and
Yep.
they're going to do that as part of their end-of-year visit in September.
Yeah, that's pretty standard procedure anyway, David.
Yep.
My only question, Ian, was they mentioned at the end that they should, I'm not sure it was in the letter or not, but they need to look at what's been raised in previous reports. Was there anything raised in previous reports? I don't think there was from memory, but
Not to my recollection.
yeah.
I don't believe.
No. So, David, is that the case? There wasn't anything raised by them previously that they should have checked up on?
Yeah, look, there's not any outstanding actions that I recall. I mean, in the past, those actions could be that we've got to implement a policy we don't currently have, or perhaps they'd suggest that there's a new internal control process that we do, i.e. one we talked about before would be to contact suppliers when they send an invoice that has new bank details on it, just to make that confirmation in person in case their invoices had been hijacked by a scammer.
Yeah.
So no, there's nothing outstanding at the moment that I can recall.
Okay, that's all good.
Any other comments or questions with respect to that? I've got none. Gentlemen, we have the recommendation before us that the 2019-20 external audit interim management letter be received. If someone would like to move that.
Yeah. Move that.
Thanks, Leon. Seconded, anyone?
Second.
Thanks. I think Jim beat you, Ben.
All right.
Okay. All those in favour? Carried. Thanks, gents. Review of the council financial policies. Comment and David, do you want to sort of elucidate on that?
I will once I get to them. So look, basically there's 3 financial related policies that are due to go to the next council meeting. So in terms of our improved practices, allowing the audit committee to pass comment on these is appropriate. There's the first two policies are really just a suggestion that they shift to a biennial review when they're due for review.
Yeah.
We're just sorting out our timelines with that one. The third policy on debt collection, once I get to that right page, that's just got an extra paragraph added to it, which relates to the circumstance when we might have an outstanding debtor in relation to a piece of land. So it could be fire, block slashing or something like that, but we actually just make it clear that we're allowed to transfer those outstanding debts to rates under the section in the Act.
Yeah.
And previously, just didn't have that actually specifically mentioned, even though it is in legislation, but it is. We found it is in other council policies, so just a bit of a tidy up there.
That's purely just to comply with the Act, is it, David?
Look, I'm not sure whether we're required to have it in there, but the fact that we've got a public policy, thought it was good practice to include that when others were doing so.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I agree with that.
But it also means that you can treat that as one debt and not multiple debts. Like if you included the rates or included the rate amount or on the rate notice, I think that's what you're saying there, is that they'll get one notice and this will be part of it.
It has to pass the process first.
Is it subject to interest, etc., if it doesn't get paid? Is it treated like other rates? I mean, that's the only question I have.
But once it hits the rates, it does.
Yep.
But it is still issued as a sundry debtor in the first instance. Where this applies is if they don't pay the sundry debtor, the legislative avenue is we can, if it relates to that land, we can transfer it onto the rates. And then it also means if the rates are outstanding, get to the point of sale of property, if it ever gets that far, then it's all wrapped in to that process, much simpler. But certainly it'll just go into the rates notice pretty much at the end of each financial year. If it's not paid, there's our avenue to transfer it over.
Yep. Thought that's what it meant.
Yep.
Just a question, Ian, to David. With the this COVID thing that's hanging around, have we had many requests on payments or anything like that, on rates or deferred payments or anything like that?
Yeah, there's actually a comment about that in my council report. We're up to 15 properties. Of course, that's less applications because of a fewer multiple properties, but it was 15 at the time of report writing. I think we might be up to 17 by now.
That's not a huge number though, David, is it? Really, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's very small percentage still of the total.
Yeah, I would have expected somewhat more than that. So
the effect hasn't been there, Ian, in this area. The effect has not been here in this area.
Right.
It hasn't been a lot of business terribly affected. Most of them have found some other way around it, or it'd be interesting to see who's actually asking. They'd want to be pubs or even cafes traded pretty well right through. It's designed to give people relief if they were severely infected, affected by the problem.
By it, yes, yeah.
Yes, not just as an excuse to delay the rates, etc.
That's right. I think we'd all agree that any application that comes before council would have to be verifiable, without a doubt. Yeah. Any other further comments in respect of all that? Those three? If that's the case, the recommendation, members, is that the Audit Committee receive the policies attached and recommend any changes to council. Someone like to move on that?
Right.
Thanks, Dennis. Seconder? Leon, thank you. All those in favour?
Brendan's doing the sleeper trick, I think.
Who?
Right.
I like to let you have a turn, Leon.
Now,
Just on that one, just on that recommendation, I assume we're going to add the words "do not recommend any changes"
correct. Yeah,
from what's presented. Yeah.
correct.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll put that in, David. And you've
Yeah,
you've
that's
faded
right.
out on us, David. You've disappeared.
Yeah, I think you got a fly on you.
You've got to fly.
Why?
Now we come to the self-praise department. Sorry, self-assessment department. So David, you collated the results from all of us. I'm assuming that we all responded.
Yes.
And from that, I'm just trying to actually read it. So we're looking at averages down there on that left-hand column.
That's correct. Yep. Vast majority in the 4 range.
Yep.
David, there's 5 members and only 4 rows of comments. Are some of them just, that's the way it fitted?
Yeah, it's probably good for me to clarify that comments aren't necessarily in order of each member. So clearly there's plenty that didn't have a comment or require a comment. So where a comment was received, it's been listed there. And the only time where there's necessarily a consistency with the person who commented is if there is a flow on from the comment above to the one below where they've said refer above. You can then match up that clearly that was the same person's comment.
There's a couple of 3s in this next section, I notice. There's people assessing their own performance. 3.6. And overseeing the governance only gets a 3.4. And also the next one after that only gets a 3.4 as well.
Better than 2.
Yeah, we certainly wouldn't be happy if we had a 2, or if we had a 2, we're not doing a lot of things right. But
Yeah.
I think, Ian, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
yeah,
That's all right. I was just going to say, I rated myself as a 3, for example, on one of them because I'm still learning. You know, I've got a lot to learn. So I can't call myself up in the credit department. I'm still in a just pass. That's the way I saw it.
yeah. I think the point is, Jim, even though you're new in the seat, the fact that you do ask pertinent and relevant questions is a big plus, because it makes us all think. You know, we just don't want to just tick a box. So if you're asking questions, it makes us go back and have a look and say, well, is that something we should be paying a bit more attention to? So I don't see that as an issue. In fact, I think sometimes it can be a real plus.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, yeah. Did you have fun collating all this, David?
It was a bit of fun trying to work out the best way to present it and transfer it. Clearly, I needed to do a bit of copy and paste, and I think we all had some challenges in completing it as well. with the formatting, whether you chose Adobe or Word or giving both of those options. Yeah, sometimes we're so used to dealing with hard copy paperwork that you can just tick and flick and hand in, and then it's someone else's problem. So, but yeah, thanks for the members for completing it electronically, and
Yep.
it did make it easier to compile despite being a challenge.
Yeah, I think the worst job in all of this is the person who actually collates it and puts it together.
I guess that, Ian, there was one issue that ran through several of the
Yep.
topics. And I'm not really putting this forward with any great confidence because I'm not sure of how helpful it is, but I'll put it forward anyway. A lot of what we do, is we look at inputs. We look at what things cost and the budgets manage that. And then we look at the products that are produced. And that seems to be the realm of the council's considerations in this area. However, of course, we do these things for a reason. We make an investment to produce a road or something like that. And we're doing that to reduce risks of certain kinds, and then eventually to lead to an improvement in some aspect of the way we live in our area. Now, when you do monitoring, you look at, you monitor your inputs, make sure things are spent in the right places. You then look at whether the outputs meet the criteria that were set. And then you look at the changes in the risk profile for particular things. For roads, it would be, say, safety. You might be looking at the risk of accidents or the risk of someone not getting somewhere on time, like an ambulance, or and so on. So you look at the change in the risk, and then out of that you see improved health, improved safety for the community. Now, I don't think we should be in the last of those domains, which is the impact of the investment. But I'm wondering whether we should be thinking about where we're changing the risk profile in our communities, and we'll be looking at the goals of the strategic plan and saying, is there a change in these areas? Now, when I went back and had a look at the terms of reference for this committee, there's a strong emphasis on the financial side of it, which is about the inputs. There isn't a lot about measuring whether outputs are what are required, and there isn't a lot about the change in the risk. So I guess that what I'm doing is raising this as an issue to think about as to what the role of this committee might be more generally. Are we going to reach up into that risk area, or is that sort of are we trying to redo what council does? Anybody's got any thoughts on that, or have we been clear?
I think as a committee, our job is obviously to make recommendations to council. We are a committee of council, and we're only a committee of council, we can't make policy, we can't require policy changes, we can't do anything like that. But I hear what you're saying though, Jim. And the other thing is that the LGA does have a standard risk framework for which, and it's not really a one size fits all. It is applicable to every council for their own circumstances. And that risk framework, the external auditors also look at that at least twice a year, and run through how council is assessing and also dealing with risk issues as they come up. And I think if we in the course of a meeting talking about something, notice that there is an area of risk there that is not already covered in the risk framework that the council's got and has got it on its risk register, then we can always make a recommendation to council to perhaps consider including that in the risk register. We can't do much more than that, I hope that the mayor and the councillors present would probably bear me out on that. We certainly can't make policy. We can't even recommend policy. We can make recommendations to councils for council to consider something, but that's about as far as we can go.
Yeah.
But bearing in mind, we're not supposed to be a toothless tiger either. I mean, if we feel that there is something, feel strongly that something is not right, we'd be failing in our duty not to bring it to council's attention, without a doubt. I hope that sort of answers the question a bit, Jim.
Yeah, that's okay. Like I said, I wasn't bringing this forward with an agenda or that we should head in this direction, but merely to ask the question. If you're heading to improvement, that's the kind of logic path you go through. But it's not really supported by the terms of reference.
No, but we can certainly, and I think it goes, and it may not be actually in the terms of reference, but it really goes without saying that if we see items that, or see policy areas or whatever that could need improvement or whatever, or looking at again, then we can always make a recommendation to council through this committee. Without saying you've got to do this, we can't do that. We're not elected.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Any other comments in respect of all that? Well, if that's the case, the recommendation, members, is that the Audit Committee self-assessment for 2019-20 be received and considered. Well, I reckon we've considered it. Thanks, Leon. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Ben. All those in favour, thank you. Canal and Cross Streets. Get around the place. Or David, do you want to give us a rundown on the situation, and perhaps then Peter can put his two bobs with you?
It's probably best for Peter to speak on his report. Obviously, I've had some input into the finance. I was on there, and like the start of Peter's report is highlighting the council decision which led to these reports being produced back to the Audit Committee. That's probably as much as I could say about it.
Yep.
Perhaps I'll start, Ian, just briefly, because I'm the one that moved the motion that these be referred to the Audit Committee, and my concern was that the way they were done wasn't complying with council policy, and we can lead on from there.
Yep.
And I mean, I'm not dead sure, but the two particular policies I'm referring to is council's procurement policy and council's budget framework policy.
Right.
And I mean, if you haven't read them, it'll be difficult to.
Yep.
They didn't come out with it, but there is. Part of the budget framework policy did, but the procurement policy that outlines how things are supposed to be done, and then how the amounts are supposed to be collated.
Yep.
Are in the procurement policy, and that's where the problems sort of are, in my view.
Peter, do you want to open the batting?
I suppose so. In formulating reports, and there's a value in formulating reports for a range of reasons, and it's obviously to go back, have a look at what we did. Did we do it well? Did we do it badly? What can we learn from that? And look at I guess the circumstances in which it occurred. So I put a number of dot points at the end of that report to identifying opportunities for improvement in processes going forward. I suppose really it's probably just open it up to questions for the committee to see, you know, other things you want to delve into relating to the report. There are deficiencies, and we acknowledge those there. Whether you think there's some other deficiencies as well, but that's about as a summary of the projects and the process in which they occurred.
So your general assessment is that the contractor really hasn't. Oh, sorry, Ben, I cut across you there.
No, you go. No.
No, I'm just saying that, Peter, your summary is that the contractor really hasn't performed terribly well.
Well, there were different contractors for each of the two projects. And I think that the key thing, certainly, that the councillors have concerns about there with respect to compliance with policy, are the questions about how are those projects tendered? Were they, you know, were we getting competitive pricing? Is the way in which the tenders were sought compliant with policy? Certainly when the invoices came in and the way that they were described in the report certainly looked dreadful and looked like what's going on there. The way that unfolded in terms of the projects on site was in my view not as bad as it looked in the way that the variations come through, and I guess the explanation of the way that the project has occurred is given there as best I can, again in a pretty summarised form. But I acknowledge that the way that those invoices looked as they came through didn't look good. And again, it's about what's our process, what can we learn from that? Can we do that better in the future? Are there areas in which we're not compliant or skirting around the edge of compliance? And again, can we modify our practices to remove any question about compliance?
Back to you, Ben.
All right. Well, look, I mean, Canaan Street, right now. I asked a question about that in council about the performance of the contractor, and there was also a question asked by Richard Daly at the budget consultation last year on the same issue, and no issues with the contractor identified to either of those questions, but they have been now. And I was only going on people talking to me that there was some issues there. And then you look at the whole budget. We approved, council I think approved the PA and CI Martin at $113,000, and yet we ended up expending $311,000, a budget of $211,000. Now, at some time under the budget framework policy, that should have been reported to council, but that level of expenditure in the procurement strategy under 0.5, like 5 point, and then there's a number of things that go on it. It lays out a table of what you do from 2,000 to 150,000, but multiple purchases, the gross value or the estimated gross value of the purchase, excluding GST, i.e. collective costs for purchases from one supplier. So you can't keep splitting stuff up and say it comes in under, so we only have to do this. You have to add them all up, and then you have to comply with the policy as they're added up. And that's where I think it's falling down. It's not happening. And that's Colin's job to make sure it does happen.
So, yeah, so in this particular case, but were they, all those additional costs though, or those different invoices, etc., were they all related to the one project though, Ben?
Well, it's all Canaan Street in this
Okay.
case, and then we go to the next one and it's all Cross Street. I
Yep.
mean, the indication from the designer, I think was, I'd have to go back and find it now, but the indication from the design was sort of in that order of money, I think. Certainly was on Cross Street anyway.
Yep.
I think well, that was Cross Street, I reckon. But like, I mean, to me, that's a serious issue. I mean, and these referred here, but it's happening in other areas too, and it seems to be something that happens quite regularly. And the policy itself seems fine. It's just the fact that, I mean, if it's not done according to the policy, you don't need to change the policy.
It's,
Right.
it's compliance, Ben, you're after, isn't it, of the policy?
Yes, that's the whole thing. I mean, you can't say this complies with the policy because it doesn't. Because
No.
I mean, the budget overrun of $100,000 has never been reported to council to this day, in compliance with our budget framework policy. And there's it's supposed to be reported as soon as practical, but no more than 60 days.
Correct.
So
Peter, can I just ask a question? That $113,000 tender for Martin,
Yep.
that wasn't for the whole job. I'm not sure if other members understand that. That was the job was split into three parts, I think, wasn't it?
The 113,000 was for the construction of the road. Didn't include seal. Didn't include ancillary works to the driveways. Didn't include the supply of materials. So supply of materials was by council. The works to the driveways as ancillary works were by council. And the seal works on that project were part of a separate tender process, which was the reseal program.
So, so those other areas went through a proper quotation and tender process. The reseals, you said you did. The supply of others, did it?
Yeah, the reseal did. Because the bulk of those other works, I say the bulk of them, all of those other works were on Canaan Street were by council. They were not contracted. So the seal works and the 113,000 were the contracted works. The rest of it was by council.
Yep.
The seal works and the 113, but and I understand, but the overall budget for the project has exceeded by 100,000 all bar a few dollars, 99,000, and that part of it, as far as the budget framework policy, council never got told about it. We can't know if we don't get told.
David's got a query, I think, up here.
Look, I was just going to mention in terms of the budget framework, this particular project was part of a broader budget for reseal work. Predominantly, I think that's where these job numbers fall under. So that's actually the broader budget that needs looking at in terms of did that exceed, the actuals exceed the budget. So rather than it being specifically on that project, the budget was actually set at a higher level.
A much higher level, that's right. Yeah. Like, I mean, it incorporated a number of other streets, but this one was just a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
It depends how the other streets went almost in relation to this. So if some of them were under and this one was over, it may have still been relatively okay. So you'd actually have to go back and look at that to decide should it have been reported on. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on this report, it clearly looks to be over, and it's a project that seems to have been separated out from all our other new seal work, and it still doesn't. But anyway, I accept that could be an issue. I'd have to go back and have a good look at it again.
One thing that's come out of it, members, is that when we do these sort of projects, as it has multiple budget allocations from different areas, we need to be on top of that a lot better than we are now. So that's one of the things we're putting in place. So we need to really look at our job number structure when we do multiple budget allocations from other areas.
Yes, yeah. Not easy to do.
Leon, you've obviously got a comment.
Yeah, I mean, to me, and I think this is what Colin's saying, is that if a project is put up, there is no point in having 5 or 6 different issues to do with it. It needs to be put up as a project that's going to cost X, because in the overall scheme of things, we might not even reckon that that's worth spending on that particular street. I mean, if you were going to put a sealed road to a place where there's one house, and it was, and the total cost was put to us, we may not do it. And without that total cost, this is what happens, is that there's little bits and pieces keep floating into the picture, and then you look at the end result, and it's a fair bit of money that we were not advised of or not aware of. Otherwise, it may not have gone ahead.
Ian, if I can,
Of course it would go ahead, but that's not quite true. If these things are put up as a total cost, they may not be, they may not fulfil the ideal of spending money wisely. But I'm only a practical person.
Dennis, you wanted to jump in?
yeah, just some of these projects, they're obviously involving contractors, whether council can do like the form work, for want of a better word, all that sort of stuff, whether that could have been done by council. I know, Peter, it takes away from our other reseeding programs and all that sort of thing, but should we be looking at that? And another comment is, are we spending enough on our design work up front? It was mentioned to me that perhaps we're not. You know, we might be just going for the cheapest option for design work, may not be the best, and therefore we could be running into some of these issues down the track. I just wonder if any other members have got any comments on that.
Yeah, actually, Dennis, your thoughts are very much what I've made some notes on. One was that the way the project was structured didn't seem to have the right people doing the right things. I'm now talking about Canaan Street, that because there were so many things that had to be linked together on the ground, it might have been better to have had it done by day labour, you know, the forming up work and so forth. It just seemed to me that, you know, it was just a lot of little bits that had to be tied together, and the fact that it was made a part of other larger projects made that whole coordination and quality control process much more difficult than it would have otherwise been. I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
When it comes to Cross Street, have we moved to Cross Street yet, or are we talking about local?
Not yet, no.
All right, well, I'll leave that for a bit later. That's a similar point.
Yep.
I'll just go anyway.
Yep.
It appears as though we've changed a bit of our method of operation, where we get a contractor in to do the bulk of the forming of the road, and then we come along and do footpaths and entrances and other bits and pieces. And I see that's happened again with the extension of Clyde Street, which isn't exactly Clyde Street, but the extension of Clyde Street. It makes people ask questions about, such as, did the contractor get the sack because he didn't do a good enough job? Don't know. so that's a public perception, which is important. The only other thing is that there's already been somebody run off that road. I'm not sure whether it's how it was built or whether the person wasn't exactly switched on, but or on another planet or something. They drove straight off the edge of it. But anyway, that's another story.
Mm. Well,
We move on to the next one, do
I
we?
was just going to suggest we move on to the next one, yeah.
This one probably does identify exactly what Dennis was talking about with, for want of a better word, when you develop the scope of works and the design, you know, the fact that it had to be pulled up and redone differently to the original design, yeah, in itself's a major problem. I mean, you go to outside consultants, engineers with the that are supposed to have the skills to do that design work, and when it's a failure, it's fairly disappointing, and the ratepayers still have to carry the cost of it. So that in itself was a problem, and also this again, you know, with the amount of money expended there, and a lot of it, like I think it was, we'll get to the budget in the end. The original MACE budget was 259,000.
Yep.
When we approved work on it at council, we were approving NEO at 90,000, I think. I don't even know that went to council. I think NEO were just given the job at 90,000 because it was under the delegation. Like anything over 100,000 has to come to council. So I don't think council actually saw anything in this at all. And if you go to that section there where you add all the invoices up that were received for that job, it added up to a significant amount of money, which and it all went to the one contractor, and clearly it should have come to council for consideration. I mean, 259,000 is a full scope of works, should have been dealt with under this policy, and the whole thing should have been, it should have been a council decision. I mean, when the community look at this, and now we've got these reports, but previously, no councillor could say, yeah, no, they were the cheapest quote, because we never saw any of it. Right, so we never saw any of it. So we spend 250,000 or more. Council has no idea what's going on because we never saw it. So I can't sit there and say, oh, yeah, they were the cheapest quote, that's why they got the job. And when we're talking those levels of money and expenditure, that's what's supposed to come to council. There's no ifs and buts, that's what's meant to happen, and it's not happening.
Yep. Any other comments there? Yeah, Leon.
I think there is an out in the procurement policy, which Peter could probably explain better than I, but it's something about if you're there and the contractor is elected to do a small job, then that's not part of the original plan, and it can be done. But when it starts to mount up into $100,000, that's not a small part. Is that right, Peter? That's part of the process?
Yeah, look, this certainly the variations on this weren't looked at in that context. What you're saying there is a clause in the purchasing contract about it's more about rates for day work, I think, is my understanding for how that clause operates.
Oh, well, I mean, it doesn't matter. There is a clause there. It appears as though, well, I don't know. You tell me why you kept on doing all this extra work that wasn't approved by council,
So
as far as the overall project was concerned.
Yeah. So the seal was a part of council approved works. It's in the reseal program. The variances to the road and to the transitions to the properties, we're on site. We're endeavouring to get a result for the community, and clearly the community were not satisfied with the works, and there was a need to complete the project and get a result for the community. So halting partway through the project adds to the cost. If you're going to stop, you're going to rescope it, reprice it, then you've got additional costs with people leaving the site, coming back to the site.
I have to agree with part of that, but at the end of the day, that should have come back to council, not so much for approval because it's already done, or at least be notified that that was what was going on. That's what I can't get over. There's a complete disregard for council. We'll just go ahead and do it. We won't refer anything back to them. It's just, I find it annoying and difficult to answer the community's questions on these things.
Can't if you don't know, Leon.
That's right. You can't.
Yeah, I certainly accept and appreciate.
It's just, Dennis, and with this one as well, like with that design work, like it was obviously designed by someone that obviously thought they knew what they were doing, but the design was changed midstream. Whether the original design was what it should have been, I don't know. Like, I'm not an engineer and I wasn't on site or anything to see that, you know, what the issues were. Did the public know more than the designer? It's a hard one. I can't answer that one. So it was, to me, it's a comedy of errors that in this whole project, and we're not going to change it now, but surely we can learn from what's happened, and if it's pay more money on design or do more work ourselves, I think that's what we should be looking at.
Yes, it really, both of these projects, they both sound a bit like the death of 1,000 cuts, don't you? A little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. And all of a sudden, the total thing is just blown right out from what the intention was. And but you know that you've gone so far, you can't call a halt and say stop. You've just got to continue doing it. But I'm just wondering if there's a way that could be overcome through the procurement policy or whatever, because Peter needs to know what he can do. I mean, all of a sudden this has gone, well, it's gone like a lead balloon because it just hasn't, the contractors obviously have not performed to the requirements that you're expecting. And all of a sudden, council's hung out to dry, and you've got so far, you just can't walk away and say stop right now. You've got to move ahead and complete. And so therefore, not only does council need to have some sort of backup on this, but your operations manager needs to have some protection in this area as well. And I don't know, Ben, have you got any thoughts as to how things could be redone as far as the procurement policy is concerned? Have you got any thoughts there?
Well, I don't think the policy needs much work. It's how stuff is done in practice that needs to have some work. I mean, Trevor Mace's original design for this and his original project cost was in the order of 259,000. Now that it's I suppose the planning of the project needs to encompass everything that was in that original design if it was done, and not done via variations where council has no negotiating position at all when it's a variation. I mean, you've got someone there, this is the price if you want us to do it. And it doesn't leave you much option to examine any competitive price. So the whole planning of projects needs to be done, and not with the idea of, oh, we'll do this bit and then we'll add all the rest in later. I mean, the whole scope needs to be planned, budgeted, and put out to tender in the proper process. That's the way I read it, and I don't think until we address those issues, there's probably not much you can change in the policy. The policy is very clear, but if it's not being followed, it doesn't matter.
Can I just comment there, Ben and other members? The points you make, Ben, are very good. We've already had a discussion on this matter between Peter and myself about how we can go forward from here and look at how do we come up to make sure we do comply, and look at a range of different ways we can put these plans in projects in place. We look at procurement planning. That's one thing where you look at, as you're saying, a whole range. What is the total job? Is it in different parts? So we do have some ideas that we're going to put in place and take to our supervisors and that before the start of the next year's projects. And that I shouldn't say hopefully, I know that they will work, because I will make sure that the supervisors comply with our requirements. And I think that's what you're about, is the policy's fine. It's just making sure people comply. So we just need to have some procedures in place that makes everyone comply.
I said that's where I'm going.
Exactly.
We've
already started that process.
Yeah, it's really procedural, isn't it?
Yes.
More than anything.
Yep.
Yeah. There's, to me, one extra factor in both these projects is that they're both a bit innovative or a bit different from what has been done before. Is that true? They were
certainly Canaan Street was, and again we were dealing with some unique issues because you've got houses within an old creek line and floor levels that don't work particularly well with the way that water's flowing around. Cross Street less so, and again we had a very experienced designer for this. One of the challenges you've got where you've got existing residences and you're going to change something that is all about their transition from road to property, is that the design might be fine. If you built that initially and then they came along and built their house, they'd accept it because that's there. But we were changing what was there. So not necessarily innovative, but different to what they were used to. And when you looked at it, there were aspects about it that weren't particularly practical. So we went off with Cross Street, we went off the experience of a man who's been in the industry for a very long time and very experienced, and felt that should be an adequate solution. But it didn't work for the residents, and it didn't work for people driving up and down the road with trucks.
I guess where I was heading with that question was the risk assessments that were done before the projects commenced. Did they acknowledge that there were some tricky aspects to the project, and therefore that there might be different approaches to the project than would be the standard approach?
certainly with Canaan Street, where we recognised, a risk assessment would say that that there's significant difference for people transitioning on and off the road, and as mitigation measures to manage the impacts to the public, we wrote letters to them, identified that we were going to build it to the design, and then work with the property owners to modify those the transitions to in a sense to make it work, recognising that the design wouldn't necessarily meet the needs of those users, and that their ability to interpret the plans. We went to them, visited them all, showed them what it was, talked about it, but recognised also that even having done that, they wouldn't necessarily understand what that means until you drive your car over or try and drag your caravan into your property. You really won't know whether it's going to work for you or not. So in the sense of recognising the risks associated with Canaan, that was the case, not so with Cross Street. So, that's an error in terms of Cross Street, and recognising that the same risk applied with Cross Street as did with Canaan Street.
Okay, so if there's a stronger approach to risk management, to considerations in the design process, and then who should be doing the work, we would get a package that would see this kind of project proceed more clearly. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's correct, Jim. Yes.
I'll also mention Canaan Street, like the planning side, when those houses were built on the western side of that Canaan Street, their floor levels probably should have been a reasonable amount higher than what they were or what they are, and that would have probably solved a lot of problems as far as building the road. But that goes back a long way. Like those houses, as Peter said, were basically built in an old creek bed, so they probably should have been up 500 to a metre, really, and then that would have made it a lot easier to build Canaan Street.
Yeah, legacy issue.
Yeah. Do we have any further comments or discussions in respect of both Canaan and Cross Street?
I'll just make one comment, Ian. Like there's been a lot of pressure put on Peter here, which I know that's the top job, but I think underneath there needs to be, as Colin said, they're looking at their supervisors and down underneath. We've got to make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing as well. There could be a breakdown there. That might be where some of the major problems are, and we'll move on to that when we get to the resheeting budget as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, that's a fair enough comment, but ultimately that's Colin's job, not ours.
I'm responsible to make sure that occurs.
That's what we pay you for, to make sure that happens.
Yeah, and that's part of what we're doing now, is going to review and look at the ways we do things. Yep, taking all that on board. Thank you.
I like the way the hand came up straight away.
I'm not going to move it now, but I'm just going to suggest something, that we might make a recommendation to council that procedures be implemented to ensure full compliance with council policy. So is that, I mean, I think that's what you said you're doing anyway.
Yeah, that's right. I've got no problem with that. It's up to us to develop the process.
But that would be an action from the audit committee as a recommendation back to council.
Yeah. I think we're getting very, very close to being operational there, which we're really not in that field. Colin, do you agree with that? I think that may be getting very close to being operational and interfering with operational. Not
really, no. We're trying to. We've got a report. The audit committee's looked at some serious problems in council, and it would be incumbent on us to make some sort of recommendation to council that addresses the reason why these things have been sent to the audit committee in the first place.
it's probably, if I can comment, that I'm not taking offence that it is operational, but Ian is correct, it is close to operational. But if you sort of framed it in the means that that the audit committee would like more compliance with procurement policy, and that's a strategic statement,
Yeah.
more than an operational statement.
Oh, to me, that's harsher. But anyway, we can recognise the fact that there's no compliance with procurement policy. I'm happy with that.
Well, that's how it started. I think it wasn't about compliance, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it is a compliance with procurement policy. That's what I referred them on. That's what the motion said.
Yeah, that's right. And then it's up to me to develop procedures out of that, rather than you direct me to do procedures. I think that's what Ian was getting to.
I mean, we need to send something back to the council that something needs to happen to ensure that policy is complied with.
Yep.
Now,
I'll move what Colin said, thanks.
what Colin said.
Would you like to rephrase it, Leon?
You can say whatever you like. You're just going around in circles at the moment.
Look, all I was doing, I think we've got to get to the next one, but I just was trying to get people to thinking that we will make some sort of recommendation at the end of that. We've got the roadworks one to deal with too, but then we need to be thinking about making a recommendation to council as an audit committee on what, if any, action council needs to take.
Well, we could say that we got the recommendation there, members, and we could just add, and that the audit committee receives the report for information and recommends council consider, I don't know, council consider ongoing compliance with procurement policies.
Council continue to monitor compliance with procurement policy.
Okay.
Or is it about the council executive being able to demonstrate that they're complying? Do you want to have that or not?
That's getting operational.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Leon.
I'll remove that. But the other thing is, from the last minutes, the procurement policy needs to be reviewed. That hasn't been done yet.
Can I just comment on that? That at your council meeting this time, the procurement policy is going up with some amendments to that, and that addresses some of the things you're talking about. And one of the things in one of the areas that talks about accountability, transparency, and reporting, I've put in there that the CEO or delegate needs to do a sample audit on a 3 to 6 monthly basis, and making sure there's compliance with the policy. I think that covers a lot of stuff what you're talking about.
That's going up. That's going up the next council meeting.
Yep. Next Tuesday. Yep.
Well,
we need to actually deal with the last report before we move the motion, I think, because that recommendation covers the whole 3, doesn't it?
yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I was going to suggest that that we receive a report for information, but we would request. We actually want to know how it went to council. That's basically the guts of it, and to come to us at our next meeting. What's a really nice way of saying that, Colin?
Well, 5.5 and 5.6 are 2 different agenda items anyway.
They are, yeah, no, they are.
I think we can move the same thing for both.
They are pretty well.
Right. If there's separate agenda items, you've got to have separate motion.
No, you've got a separate motion.
Yeah. You can't put them together. So just move that one you've just talked about then for that Canaan across, and then work out something at the end of the reshoot.
Yeah, the audit committee received the report.
Yep.
And recommend council continue to monitor compliance with procurement and budget framework policies.
Yep.
Is that clear enough?
It is for me. Yeah.
And no one's objecting to it. It's
Well,
having a set of words that are effective and work.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly not operational. That's in the policy area.
I'll second that.
Okay, thanks, Leon. Any further discussion? Obviously not. All those in favour? Beautiful. Resheeting projects. Now,
Well,
basically, we've covered this pretty well anyway, haven't we?
Sort of and sort of not.
That's correct.
Ask some questions.
Well, I mean, basically what we've had, like it's a major over expenditure on the budget. So for a period of time, we've been spending money that's not in the budget, and there's been no budget allocation to cover it. When we did the budget review at the last meeting, the expenditure was, and I know, but also from what's written in the report, that there is a few things to be journaled out as far as stock and supervision and stuff like that. But the expenditure was sitting at $2.2 million at the last meeting, which, sort of sees the expenditure more than 400,000 over budget. Now, my understanding is that needed to be addressed a lot earlier. When the money ran out, that needed to be addressed earlier than it was. Effectively, we've been spending money, about 400,000 in rough figures, in excess of what was in the council budget. That would be accurate, wouldn't it? Didn't anyone hear me?
Do you want management to comment or members?
Well, no, I mean, whatever. That basically what I said is what happened.
Yeah, well, obviously there's an overrun there, but I want to see why that overrun actually happened. As I spoke with Peter yesterday, if we're doing 100 mil on roads, are they getting 100 mil? 120 mil, are they getting 120 mil? What caused the overrun? I know there's a few different scenarios there with rubble and stuff like that that's on hand. But again, I'll say what I said before. Is it down below Peter, and are those people, staff, actually doing the job properly? I don't know. I'm not a road construction guy. Are those roads, have they got 100 mil on them? Have they got 120 mil on them? That's what I'd like to find out. Are we putting too much on? Is Clare Quarry not as efficient as what we thought it was? I think there's a fair few questions to be asked here.
You're probably right, Dennis. Like there's obviously issues, but we've always had wider roads with more material on them and narrower roads with less material, and it certainly comes back, and Peter points this out in his report, comes back to an average, which it always has. Look, the big difference I can see in the last couple of years is how much the budget is predominantly based on us doing the work. We allocate that $1.72 million, but then that pays for our plant and our staff and everything else to do the work. Now, immediately that you bring in contractors to do that work, that's where the budget blows out straight away. And the level of contract that's come in the last couple of years is, without any significant increase in the budgeted amount, is effectively what's driving the blowouts more than anything else. You go back 3 or 4 years and we spent about $22,000 on contractors. The next year it went up to 50. and the next year it went up to 230, and the next year it gone up to 300. And I think this year we've spent, I added up Neo infrastructure, I think we've spent, I think just with Neo infrastructure this year, we've spent $593,000. And like, not 1 cent of that's been to council.
In one of those, to answer some of this, is it that as council we're trying to do far too much work than we can do ourselves these days? We've had to go to contractors to keep up with the amount of work we've been doing.
Well, it's a bizarre thing. I mean, we own a number of trucks. We've got 4. We had 2 at some stage. It would be massively cheaper to pay our staff overtime than to bring in other contractors. And I mean, there was a massive amount of other contractors cutting on the Blaley East Road, and that just hits the budget straight away. I mean, we budget for buying the material off Clear Quarries, and it fits in fairly well at the price they supplied at. I mean, cost-wise, it's competitive with anything a contractor will do from those contracts that were presented some time ago. I mean, it's a very economical product, and it goes down quickly and all the rest of it, and it makes a good road, and people are happy with the road when they get it. Generally, anyway, you get a few sticky patches and things from time to time, but generally, it works itself out pretty well.
Are we trying to do too many kilometres of resheet?
Well, even if you're trying to do too many kilometres, it's how you go about doing the increased work. I mean, fundamentally, you bring contractors in when we own the plant. You can't do both.
Leon?
This has come up before, that 76 kilometres is the benchmark. Don't know where that came from. Last year you did 71, year before you did 63. So I don't know where the 76 kilometres came up. But if we look at it this way, there are two sets of projects. One is the new seals. The other one is resheeting. Now, we've run out of money early with resheeting, and we've used contractors to do the new seals. Now, I don't understand that. If our workers had gone and done the new seals, they could have gone back to the other job afterwards and probably still got the same amount done, because we've actually pulled up early now because we couldn't finish the work. We haven't got too much work to do. We've got so much money to spend, and the work should be regulated by the money, not going out and doing extra things and expanding the budget by using contractors. It's just pretty simple to me. You just don't go and do these jobs when I take Ben's point about the contractors carting water all over the place, when those people would have been better off in the doing the new seals. Now, Peter in his report says that, and I'll interpret this, that they kept going to keep the people working. Now, at the same time, we had contractors in here doing this other work. So it's all a matter of allocating resources. Correct.
Look, I suppose in previous years, we haven't done the sort of road construction work. We've always had contractors come in and do stuff that we don't have the skills for, but we've never had contractors doing the stuff that our guys have got the skills to do. And you know, we had 2 construction crews for years with the same amount of staff running within the council. We had 2 crews. Now we predominantly run 1 construction crew, and that might be delivering some efficiencies. But there's other capacity in the council for some of this small construction. The idea that we need to bring in contractors for that is not where the contract dollar should be spent. The contract dollar needs to be spent we used to always spend it on, you know, little bits of seal and stuff with mini pave and stuff that our guys didn't have the equipment to do or the experience. So you've got to look at the efficiencies too. I mean, if you're asking our guys to do something that they're not familiar with, it's not going to be done that efficiently. Whereas building roads and stuff like that, that's their bread and butter, and that's what they should be doing. So there's a number of problems there, like as far as I can see anyway, in how we do things in-house, and we've got the budget clearly indicates, and we haven't set any more money in the next year's budget. So, and unless we change what we do, you can guarantee that if we do exactly the same thing as we've done this year, next year, we'll have exactly the same problem at the end of it. We'll run out of, we'll expend more money than we allocated. And so we need to take a serious look at that.
Dennis, Ian, I've said at council meetings that we've got a lot of machinery. Do we need to employ some more staff so that we can do this work rather than employ contractors, as Ben said, like to cart dirt, grader road to levels and build those sub bases for the reseals, for the new seals, sorry. I think that's a job we can do ourselves. And with that, as Leon said, there's 76 kilometres, that's a target. If we've got to stop at 70, it's not the end of the world to me. Just work within your budget frame, and if we don't get to that 76 kilometres, well, so be it. And maybe we can employ a couple more if we can get them. That'd be the big thing, skilled operators to work our machinery and do a lot of this work ourselves, and it might alleviate a lot of the problems that we seem to be running into.
Yeah. Peter?
Yes.
What's the situation with, as far as the works guys is concerned? Have you got enough of the right type of person with the right sort of skills, or do you need more, or what?
So the mix of work is a little bit different each year, and there are nuances within that. So whilst the last 2 years we've done the new seals ourselves, this year we didn't, and the reason why we didn't is because the works guys we have were not comfortable to do the works that needed the survey associated with them. This year the streets were a little bit different. The year before, down in Yakka, they were quite comfortable. There was no survey, there was no design. They were able to just, you know, use their noggin and construct the road because there was nothing too problematic with them. So, you know, it doesn't take much difference. And guys are saying, no, not confident to do that. Don't want to be involved in that. If they're not confident, then it becomes problematic. We've also got an ageing workforce, and we've got people who might have 10 years ago, they might have done a range of works. Now they can't. They're not physically able to do some of that work. So we're starting to get some changeover in our staff because of retirement, because of illness. And so some of that's occurring, but we're still managing blokes who can't lift their arm above their shoulder and you know, can't get out of a grader and, you know, use a shovel because their knees are no good. Yeah, we've got some challenges there, and we already had discussions about the next year's proposed program and how that might be done differently, whether the mix of roads we've got in next year are roads that our blokes will be confident to make. You know, early indication is yes, there will be. So that being the case, we won't be looking to contract out the construction of those roads next year. So I mean, that gives us that extra scope of works to be able to do within the allocated budget. So, you know, that's a part of it. The cost of, if we've got, you know, as to the materials that go into the roads, as I pointed out there in the report, we've paid into a program that we haven't done any detailed estimate for. And so to be able to review it and say, is that what the expectation of the cost of that road is? We haven't been able to do that. So we've implemented a process to improve on that. So we've got detailed estimates for the for the program for next year that identifies the cost of the rubble that's going into it, how many culverts are going to be replaced on the road, whether they need tree trimming up them, etc., etc. So we've got detailed estimate that we're able to then follow through the year, and that gives us an early indication: are we up or are we down? Are we, are these estimates we've done close, or are they a long way away? Where you're dealing with an average cost per kilometre, then your information isn't close enough to the source of what you're doing to be able to say this is changing. What's wrong with that? Have we used more material? Have we not? With the material depths and the volume of material there, when I look at the volume that's gone into or by invoice, so we invoiced for the material that's gone on the Belalee East, for example, I can look at that and say, well, that's about what I'd expect. That's within the, it's a little bit under what I actually expected would have gone on to Belalee East, but the product costs us twice as much as what our own rubble does. Why are we using that? We're using that because the last time we sheeted Belalee East was about 8 years ago. That's all we're getting out of it is 8 years out of the other material. We should be getting 16 years out of the material. So you've got we're using material that will perform better and will give us a longer life. So whole of life costs reducing, less dust, those sorts of issues. So it performs better in a number of ways. We can certainly go and measure what our depth of material is on the roads to be confident we've got it. We're doing a measurement of that before we're putting roads into the proposed program. So we've got an idea, a confident idea about how is that material lasted on the existing road, and are we, is there still 50 millimetres of material there, or is there only 10 millimetres? We've got verification of what's going on to it. We got ourselves between a rock and a hard place with the program this year for a couple of reasons. And that's pretty much what I talked about there in the report. And we put in some processes to ensure we've got a better control on it and a better understanding of the inputs into the program to manage the budget next year.
So you don't believe that you're going to need any extra troops on the ground, Peter?
Certainly, we need. The difficulty is picking up the right troops when we go out to try and recruit. We picked up one really good hand in this last year through a retirement and replacement of that person. We've got another couple of guys who are infilling at the moment through contract employment, and that gives us the opportunity to look at them. I mean, they'll come and they say, oh, I've got this or I got that, I can do this and I can do that. In the old days, you'd put them on for a week, and if they didn't perform, you'd get rid of them and get somebody else. Well, you can't do that these days. Once we put them on the books, we're stuck with them. So through contract employment, we can get a look at them for a while and see whether their actions measure up to their resume, and get a sense of where they might fit into the team. And so when there is so when we do advertise, we at least know we've got a competent person to be able to put in the role if we don't get anybody else.
Yeah, I think we're all agreed it's much harder to get rid of someone than put them on. Can be a very expensive process.
Yeah, I would have thought most of these people would be engaged on a trial period the same as anybody else when they go into a new job, wouldn't they?
Well, for 3 months, I mean, even if you got them on a 3-month probationary period, you can still be good for 3 months, and then then you start to be a problem in the workforce. We've got a recently we put on somebody who's a very good worker, very competent worker, and we hadn't had them through that process. But 6 months down the track, we find that they're much better working on their own, because in a team, they create problems. Very good skills, and we want to retain them. So it's a matter of finding where we best fit them into the work structure, to be able to give us the best results we can without mucking up
Putting him in the
around.
team. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a
No.
fairly delicate balancing act, I think.
Yeah, no, that's not our job though.
Oh, no.
Is external funding causing you greater complexity in dealing with how you go about doing the jobs?
External funding insofar as, well, let's look, so we've got $1 million of drought funding we've got to do. So looking forward, we've got 20 odd little projects that we've got to manage from a supervisory perspective, and supervision is one of those things. So, can we do a job over here and a job over there? Who's going to supervise those jobs? So in terms of supervisory capacity, we're more limited with the more jobs we're doing internally. It's okay to have people on the ground, and we've got a few people on the ground, but when we start to do more than a range of jobs, we've got so that, for example, the drought projects have all got to be done by external contractors. Someone's got to manage those, someone's got to look after them. While we're doing that, we're not looking after our own blokes, ensuring that they've got the information that they need.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Any further discussion in respect of all of this, members?
Well,
I'll
probably
recommend-
on this one, there's a recommendation there, but I think, and all these reports should go to council anyway, but this one definitely needs to be referred back to council so the other councillors are as aware as the councillors that are present here. So something along those lines, that the audit committee note the report and refer it back to council for further consideration.
It's got to go to council anyway under the
Yeah, it does. You're quite right, Peter. But I mean, just from something from here, like the audit committee notes the report and refers it and refers it back to the council. I suppose that's about all we can do.
Or we can move the same motion we had for the last one, Ben.
This is not all about policy, though, this one.
Sticking to budget. Don't know if it isn't.
Yeah, but like it's like I couldn't tell you. Like I don't think any of the. I can't think of any of the. I might be wrong. I'm just trying to think. Did any of these outside jobs that were done in association with these roads come to council, or were they all? I just don't remember them coming to council as quotes for particular. Like I know there was significant money, as you point out in the report, spent on replacing culverts, but I have no recollection of that coming to council.
But is that getting operational, Ben?
Oh, well, it depends on the figure. It depends on the figure, whether it's a council, whether it's, I don't think the budget for it, from there, I'll go and find it, but I don't think the budget for it was.
You approved the budget at the beginning of the year, Ben, when you how much is in resheeting.
Yeah, we approved the resheeting budget,
and it's never looked at again.
We monitor it all the time, actually. If you read the annual budget reviews.
Oh, do we?
Well, but you might not read them. I can tell you now, at the December budget review, the resheeting budget was 52% spent.
Resheeting, those reviews are just to fix up problems with bad budgeting and hiding stuff. It's a joke.
The reviews do that, but if you looked at the detail in the budget review, it had all the roads that were done and what percentage was done on them,
I'll take your point, Ben. It's all right. It's all right.
The expenditures there, and I went back and had a look at it, and at the end of December, roughly 52% completed, which was in line with the budget expenditure, but obviously that's not how the year finished
up.
The
next 3 months were a bit of a disaster then, weren't they, Ben?
They certainly were.
That's right.
Can I just ask a question, please, if I may, Ian? By referring these reports to council, which you moved, Ben, after...
I haven't moved it yet, I'm considering.
No, sorry, you moved from council to the audit committee, for the audit committee with that, right? So what was the intent of what you wanted out of the audit committee? Because I think that forms part of the recommendation.
Well, that's right. And the audit committee, we certainly got that with the policy stuff.
Yep, yeah, that's right. So what do you want to get out of it? Why did you refer it now? What outcome do you want to go back?
Well, I think the audit committee needed to have a look at this, but I don't think we've actually, like, it hasn't, yes, it explains some of the things that have happened, but it doesn't identify what we're going to do to fix it from happening again. Whereas I think on the other two, we can easily identify that compliance with policy is the main part of the game there, and this one, you've got a massive over expenditure. There's a number of things you could say are excuses for it, but that doesn't really. It should not happen.
Right. So do you want the audit committee to make a statement that this reshooting budget is not acceptable and needs to be reviewed and reported back to council or something?
Well, I'm just trying to think of a way of wording it civilly enough.
Ben, Peter has said that he's put different measures in place going forward as to how they're going to budget for the next lot of resheeting. Is that all that needs to be conveyed to council? That from the audit committee findings that things will be done differently?
Look, I think council and the community are going to, you're talking about nearly $500,000 or $400,000 over expenditure. The community's going to want answers, and so's the rest of the council. And we have to, like, I can say that, it's a lot more money spent on contractors, and if that hadn't happened and this and that, and that's where a bulk of it is. But, that's not the fine detail of it all. There's some detail in this report, but we need to be confident going forward. What we need to establish is that we're confident going forward that we're not going to have a repeat of this. And council needs to be confident that it's not going to happen next year or the year after, that we're going to have proper processes in place that make sure that this level of over expenditure does not occur, because it's only just no more than dumb luck that we've got a great heap of extra roads to resheeting money to cover it, roads to recovery money that covers it off. I mean, if we didn't have that money, and we certainly didn't know we were going to get it, it didn't come until, when did it come, David? Early this year, didn't it? That extra allocation?
There was some notification about it. Might have even been late last year, but that's always very uncertain until they actually ask you, right, it's time to tell us what road you plan to do, and it's time that you've got to claim it. We didn't even know that we actually had to claim it this financial year until that last quarterly return. They basically made us claim it.
Yeah, so and if we didn't have that, we'd be looking at a very different situation with this over expenditure, and that can't be allowed to go on. So
we totally agree with that, Ben, and that's what we've sort of said, that we're putting in new processes and procedures to ensure we comply with the budget framework stuff. So we have to make sure that happens, yeah. So that either can come from the audit committee or it can come from council. Leon, what do you want to tell me?
Well, it all sounds a bit like, yes, I'll still love you in the morning. sort of talk, because there is nothing to say there's a report. There is, and who's going to oversee that report? Is it this committee? Does it go to council of the new plans? I mean, I've said it 100 times. It's fantastic to have a plan, but you've got to let a lot of sets of eyes look over it, especially those that have an interest in it, before you can say that is a good plan. Got to review it. Now, maybe Peter's done the documentation of the changes. Maybe you've done them, Colin. I don't know. In both these two cases, we haven't seen them, so it's still, I'll still love you in the morning bullshit. We've got to see something. One of these two committees has got to see something. I don't care which one it is.
We only make recommendations to council. It's obviously council that has to make any real decision.
That's right.
But we can develop another useless policy. If it's not followed, it won't matter. And
this is a plan, Ben. A plan, not a policy. This is a plan.
Well, a plan, a policy, whatever.
This is a plan. It's different. It's going to actually achieve something.
We don't.
The policy's supposed to do that.
We probably don't.
We
don't set the work plan exactly and dictate it all. We might approve a plan that's presented to council, but that's developed predominantly by, well, supposed to be developed by the asset management system that we've purchased. And that's what's the fundamental thing that drives our resheeting program now. Now, how well that's working, someone else can tell me. I'm not operating that system. I've got no idea. But
it's not the program that's the problem. It's the fact that the budget, the over budget expense happened, and that's what Peter. That's what Peter and Colin are putting together documentation to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and the question there is, you need to give us a rap over the knuckles to say you didn't comply, go away, put something together, but that's operational. We make sure that is. Then you check up on us to say that you sticking to budget and policy. That's your role, not operational.
So you don't reckon we need to look at that? You don't reckon we need to look at that at all, Colin? We
need to advise you that we will stick to that. Yeah.
Stick to what?
Budget. We have taken the rap and said, well, we've done it wrong. We need to put something in place. I'll do that as CEO to make sure it does happen. You rap me over the knuckles and you check on me through a budget process to make sure that we're sticking to it.
So, sorry, Ian, we seem to be going around in circles here.
We are a bit.
Is the audit committee have received the report?
Yeah.
And that management will report to council on future avenues or future ways of spending money, or how our budgeting processes are completed. We just seem to be going around and getting nowhere.
Yeah, we've just got to. I think we've got to cut to it here.
It ultimately for us, it's compliance with policy, right? And that is true.
Yeah.
Colin's quite right there. The only thing we can, like us delving into how Colin does his job in making sure the compliance happens is probably not our role. But what we need to do is basically we need to ensure that compliance happens in the future.
Yes, totally agree.
I mean, it's part of Colin's job. It's part of his performance criteria and everything else.
I think after the last hour and a half, they've probably got the message, Ben.
You reckon?
I got it a long time before you told me as well. Okay.
And that's probably a reason why I don't think we need much more discussion, really.
No, I think we just need a motion that goes back to council that, and it's probably the same motion that we'll do as the previous one. We just need, receive the report and what was the wording? Compliance.
Said that 15 minutes ago, Ben.
You did.
Yes. Jesus.
Well,
David, you got the same words there?
I was just going to say, can we use the same words?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll read those words if you like.
Yep.
So the first one, the Audit Committee received the report for information and recommend that Council continue to monitor compliance with procurement and budget framework policies.
Absolutely. And that fits this one as well, and I'll move that. Thank you very much. 15 minutes on.
It's all right, Leon, you like to have a talk sometimes. We going to vote?
Yep.
Second,
You.
Second,
There we are. Well done, members.
Long way around.
It's all right.
I never thought we were going to get there, boys.
I enjoyed the process.
Okay. Audit Committee work program. No changes in there, are there, David? Doesn't appear to be.
yeah, this report is just to note the items that were due in this agenda that haven't been presented for a couple of different reasons. One of them we already did at the previous meeting.
Yep.
So it was too soon to look at internal controls again. And just the other two that, Colin was unable to complete with other things happening.
Yeah.
Apologise for that. I'll maybe make sure they're the next time.
Well, anything that's not dealt with, just carry forward on the work program. But I think we've dealt with pretty well everything anyway.
And in terms of the work program moving forward, of course, probably the next meeting, new financial year, we tend to present a draft work program for that year. So these things can be shuffled in that work program in light of them being deferred from here.
Yep. Any further comments in respect to that?
I'm good.
Okay, all good. Okay, the recommendation, members, is the Audit Committee considers any changes to the adopted work program.
No changes to the work program.
No
And there aren't
change.
any, are there?
No. I'll move in that area.
Thanks, Leon. Oh, second, thank you, Jim.
Yeah, happy to.
All in favour? Beautiful. Okay, gents. Any other business?
Shouldn't be.
Anyone? After all that, there can't be. David, you got a date, or Colin, you got a date in mind for the next meeting?
I haven't even looked at it yet, sorry.
That's all right. I think that we'll be able to do it face to face, won't we?
Yeah, I think we might be up by then. David, you got something you want to bring up?
I just, obviously that meeting, it'll depend perhaps firstly on where the annual financials are at. Like that, it's probably too soon at that point for those. But having said that, the normal quarterly meeting, which would then fall in December, is clearly miles too late. So, and we're also reviewing perhaps the timing of these meetings, a bit like that. Those financial policies we looked at and budget reviews, they're all supposed to go to the Audit Committee before Council. So, I guess Colin and I will initially just look at our work program and look at some of those processes, and that might determine some of the future meeting dates. But, you know, I guess we've got new technology now as well. If we have to have sort of extra meetings just for one-off items to meet a requirement.
Sure. You might be interested to know that Barossa Council, and I sit as an independent member on that one, we're actually having a face-to-facer in Uri on the 23rd of June. So it's less than 2 weeks off, so I think that this COVID-19 is just starting to roll back a bit now too. So
that'd be good.
It'll be nice to finally kiss it goodbye, I think. Absolutely. Well, gents, I think if there's nothing further we need to discuss, it's 3:58, and I'll declare our meeting over. And thank you all
Close.
for your attendance.
Thank you all.
See ya.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
everyone.
See ya, Ben.
See ya, Leon.
Oh.
Bye bye all. See ya.
See ya.
All right.